Good morning. We are beginning the lectures for the third test. Today we're moving into the classic period. The classic period dates are 1750 to 1825. One of the features of the classic period is it coincides with a period in history called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment believed that man had the possibility of achieving any goal that he set for himself. It was a period in favor of applied mathematics and sciences, and a lot of logical, practical thinking was the norm of the day. So this greatly affected music. At the end of the Baroque period, composers such as George Friedrich Handel, Johann Sebastian Bach, and even Antonio Vivaldi were all being affected by it. These winds of change, they needed to adapt their music to suit the new ideas and the new taste. And so there's going to be a new elegance, a new idea for music in this 75-year period of time. The main new form for the classic period is the symphony. One of the two things that I like to do with my music appreciation classes is to trace the evolution process of the opera and the symphony through the major periods of classical music. So today we're going to show how we advance toward the symphony. And the symphony is governed by a form called the sonata cycle. So please refer to your sonata cycle PowerPoint. In the Baroque period mainly was featured on vocal music. We had the invention of the opera, the oratorio, the passion, and of course the cantata was finally finalized. But we did have several new instrumental concepts to emerge. The overture that was used for the opera and the oratorio for the Baroque period was either a French or an Italian overture. Remember, the French overture was a two-sectioned overture that began with a slow dotted rhythm pattern and ended with a fast form in the form of a fugue. The Italian overture was a three-section overture, beginning fast, having a slow middle section, and an ending fast section. The other ideas from the Baroque period that used multiple sections or movements included the concerto. The father of the concerto was Antonio Vivaldi, and the concerto had three movements. The first movement being fast, slow middle movement, and ending fast again. The other two concepts were the sonata da chiesa, the church sonata, and the sonata da camera, or a party-like atmosphere, a dance suite. The sonata da chiesa, or the church sonata, would have been used at a funeral or maybe some sort of church service. So it did observe multiple movements, but it did not have extreme changes of tempo. So mostly slow and moderate tempos for it. The sonata da camera, the suite of stylized dances, was used for parties, for wedding receptions. The century of the dance was the second century of the Renaissance. And so a lot of the different countries and even some regions within the different countries came up with their own national or regional dance. And so it was very fashionable in the Baroque to weave 3, 4, 5, or even 6 of these different dances together for these party situations. So these 5 different things are the predecessors to the symphony way back in the Baroque period. Then we make a couple of stops along the way before we reach the full-blown classic sonata cycle symphony. The first stop is still within the Baroque period. At the end of the Baroque, in the last 50 years, there were 4 composers, all Italian composers, one of which was Antonio Vivaldi. And they were creating a new, different type of 3-movement form. Instead of a concerto, they called it the Italian suite. Now this is showcasing the Enlightenment. Instead of the focus being on a soloist, or in the concerto grosso format, the concertino, in the Italian suite, everybody was able to participate all of the time. So it was an idea about an even balance within your ensemble. In the first fast movement, they would use 2 separate melodies. the melody number 1 would begin and end, and then you would hear melody number 2. Remember, we're in the texture of homophony now. We're not using polyphony, where you would hear 2 or more melodies simultaneously. These were heard back to back. And later on, when the symphony is created, the first movement uses this concept of 2 melodies or 2 themes. Then the middle movement was a slow dance, and the ending movement was a fast dance. So the suite, in a way, was a hybrid idea of things from the past, especially using the sonata da camera and maybe a few ideas from the concerto. Then following these Italian composers, we now move up to the time when we're moving into the classic period, right around 1750, and we have our second school, the School of Mannheim. Way back at the beginning of the class, we talked about the School of Notre Dame, the 2 composers who were the inventors of polyphony. The School of Mannheim had 12 composers who actually, and I hate it when people use the air quotes, but I'm using the air quotes here, they actually created the first quote-unquote symphony, even though it doesn't go by the full-fledged sonata cycle that I'm about to get to. But the School of Mannheim does 2 things for us. They add to the size of the orchestra. The orchestra size in the Baroque was around 20. Now we're going to add a few more woodwinds, a few more percussion, a couple more brass instruments, and now the School of Mannheim is using a 30-member orchestra. So this adds to the range, adds to the power that the orchestra can possess. And they make, for the first time, an instrumental form that has a 4-movement form. Fast, slow, dance, fast. So if you can repeat after me, fast, slow, dance, fast, that will help you as you start to remember and understand the process of this sonata cycle. So now we arrive at the full-blown classic period. The father of the sonata cycle, the father of the symphony, is called Papa Haydn in history. His name is Franz Joseph Haydn, who I'll talk about a little bit later. He wrote 108 symphonies during his lifetime. And then Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is said to be the perfecter of the sonata cycle. In Mozart's very short life, he composed 41 symphonies. And all of these tend to go by this formula with a few changes, a few alterations. But for the most part, this is a great idea. I've had students in the past to say, wow, this is so in-depth, this is so stringent. But it was a wonderful concept because they didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time they wanted to compose a symphony. The form was essentially in place, and so that allowed them to just concentrate on the melodies and the harmonies that they wanted to achieve. Okay, let's talk through the sonata cycle. I'm going to be using the word sonata a whole lot during this lecture, and sonata literally means a sounding together. And the overall form is called sonata cycle. The first movement of sonata cycle is called sonata allegro form. Remember, allegro is one of the tempo markings that we learned at the beginning of the semester. Allegro means fast. So in the name of the first movement, it announces the tempo. The sonata allegro form of the 4 movements of the sonata cycle is the most involved. It starts out with a section called the exposition. Within the exposition, we hear the 2 melodies or 2 themes, again, back to back. This is a holdover from the Italian suites. Following the exposition, the next section is the development. And the development for the classic period basically served one purpose, to change the key. Then we go to the third section called the recapitulation. In the recapitulation, it is a rehearing of the exposition. So we hear the 2 themes again, but the change is that we're in a different key. The majority of instrumental music in the classic period is known as absolute music or pure music, music for music's sake. This is not like the Four Seasons concerti that we talked about by Vivaldi. Remember, the Four Seasons were program music, where you would read the sonnet and then be able to hear the music and see how they coincide. But here we might have Symphony number 35 by Mozart, and then it says in D major. So it tells us what scale is going to be used. And that's basically all the information that we're given. So if that's the case, then the exposition is going to be heard in D, surrounding that all-important tonic note. Then the development section, we're going to typically move from the tonic to the second most important scale degree, which is the dominant. Using D major as our example, then we would move to the key of A. So once we arrive at the recapitulation, we rehear the exposition now, but instead of it being in D, it's now in the key of A. So we're moving from tonic to dominant. So what is that exactly? Well, that's ternary form. Ternary form, which has been around for a long time now, we're seeing it now in instrumental music being used anew. A section, B section development, and then the return to the A section, but it gets that A prime because of the change of the key. The exposition and recapitulation, again, same thing, but just a different key is what makes them different. Sometimes, not all the time, a tag on at the end is added, so you could have a fourth section called a coda. If a composer wanted to bring closure to the piece, they might go back and choose one of the two themes to rehear for a final time, or maybe the composer simply wants to change the key yet again and have us add a new key for the second movement. Well, that might be a choice for them. But the three main sections are exposition, development, and recapitulation. You might want to stop now and listen to an example of this particular movement. Eine kleine Nachtmusik, or The Serenade for Music by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, is on your listening list. So please listen to the first movement of it, or Eine kleine Nachtmusik is also translated as a little night music. It's a wonderful string composition. And so you'll be able to clearly hear the two different melodies used in the exposition and how things change as you go through that particular movement. The second movement of Sonata Cycle is called Theme and Variations. This is going to be slow in tempo, and it's basically self-explanatory. You start off with a major theme, and this is going to be the melody or the theme that you're going to hear the most within the symphony. And this is going to serve a purpose. One of the concepts of the Enlightenment is that Mozart, Haydn, they're wanting their music to be universally loved. They're not just concerned with their own country. They want everybody to hear their music and be able to maybe hum it along the way after they've heard the performance. So this is probably the tune that they're hoping that you will hum after you hear the symphony, because it's certainly the one that you've heard the most. So maybe the theme in the beginning is in a major key. Maybe it's mostly played by the violins. Maybe it's mostly in half notes. Later on, when you hear the same melody, it's going to undergo variations. Maybe one variation, instead of being heard in the violins, you hear it in the trumpets. Maybe instead of being in major, for the next variation, it's going to be in minor. Maybe instead of being in half notes, it's a little bit quicker because it's now in quarter notes or in eighth notes for the most part. There's some sort of alteration, but still you can pick it out. Our creator of the Sonata Cycle, Franz Joseph Haydn, this was his favorite movement in the Sonata Cycle, so he would really pour a lot of attention to his theme and variations. So please take a listen to some of the examples for Haydn. You have on your listening list the second movement to Haydn's Surprise Symphony. Surprise is a nickname for this symphony. It's not something that Haydn had entitled it, but the gimmick that he uses in this second movement is the reason why it's dubbed or nicknamed Surprise today. Don't listen to it too loudly. Your third movement in Sonata Cycle is your dance. Haydn grew up in Vienna, and Vienna is going to become the center for music. Now, in the early beginnings of Mozart's life, A lot of people have said that Mozart had to go to Italy to make a name for himself early on. But by the time he moves to Vienna, Vienna is becoming the new centerpiece for music. So Italy was certainly the musical power in the Baroque period, but things are going to be changing now. So Haydn, growing up in Vienna, he knows the taste in Vienna, and he also knows their favorite dance. Their favorite dance is called the Minuet. So the third movement of Sonata cycle is called Minuet and Trio. This is also in ternary form, where the minuet serves as the A section, the trio serves as the B section, because you hear the minuet twice, the trio twice, and then the minuet comes back in again, and you hear that twice as well. Also, a great example of this is from A Little Night Music by Mozart, so that's on your listening list as well. This does offer a little bit of familiarity with the Baroque period in terms of the concerto grosso. For the symphony, the trio was a little bit more difficult, and so a concertino or the main soloist within the orchestra would perform the trio, where everybody, the ripieno or the tutti, would perform the minuet. The final movement of Sonata cycle does offer the composer a choice. They could go back and redo a Sonata Allegro form. They could do a fast theme and variations. But probably around 70% of the time, the composers chose Sonata Rondo. The Robert Adams definition of a rondo is the main idea keeps coming back around. So the rondo either came in 2 parts or 3 parts. If it was 2 parts, the form went A, B, A, B, A, where the A section keeps coming back around after each contrasting section is heard. For a 3-section rondo, it's A, B, A, C, A, B, A, where you have a contrasting B and C section. Each time they are heard, they are immediately followed by the A section. So it keeps coming back around. So there you have it, the Sonata cycle. First movement, Sonata Allegro form with exposition, 2 themes, development, recapitulation, coda. Second movement, theme and variations. Third movement, Minuet and Trio. And the final movement, Sonata Rondo, with 2-part being A, B, A, B, A, or 3-part being A, B, A, C, A, B, A. Our next segment will be on Franz Joseph Haydn, the creator of the Sonata cycle.